King of the Ring was one of WWF's crown jewel events, and in the Attitude Era that was thrown to the wayside with King of the Ring 1999. We have a ton of lawsuits to cover as a fallout from everything that's going on in 1999, and we review the show today, and the Podski starts now.
The Podski with John Baker. For over 1 year, the revolutionary force in audio entertainment.
Ooh, yeah!
Brother,
Let me talk to you! Freak out, freak out!
I just had an out-of-body experience!
Insane in the membrane!
Brother,
Yeah! And I'm here for only one reason, and that's to take it to the limit, yeah!
somebody stop the damn man!
I'm living on the edge.
Who is your daddy?
Hello and welcome to the Podski. I'm your host, Johnny Bakeshow, and ringside with me is Teddy Mongoose. We are back to 1999 here today as we review King of the Ring 1999. But before we get there, we need to remind you listeners of our bonus show, Ravishing Reflections, the Career of Rick Rude, is available now, which all of you unlocked when we hit 400 subscribers. It's crazy because last week we were saying we just want to get to 400, and this week we are over 500. So the Eddie Guerrero bonus show has been unlocked as well. So we have our work cut out for us, but we have Great American Bash 2004 next week, and we don't want to do overlapping content. So the Eddie Guerrero bonus show is going to come after the Great American Bash show, just because there's overlapping content in there since Eddie is a part of the show and he's a really big part of the show. So we don't want to overlap. We want to give you all fresh content. So that will come post Great American Bash. But thank you for subscribing and listening. We greatly appreciate it. This Bad Blood show has really taken off for us. So we thank you for checking in. We're going to give you more 2004 next week. So now we're on the road to the Scott Hall episode. Back to 1999, we left off here with Over the Edge, and there's so much stuff that has happened, and there's so much stuff that we haven't even covered yet because we just did the Requested Invasion shows, so we have the Higher Power. We have a lot of stuff happening here in 99, so will you please catch us up here, Teddy? We have a lot to cover. This show is jam-packed.
Yeah, this one's deep. And the crazy thing is, as much as we have, there has been a lot that's been left on the cutting room floor. And so our sincere apologies to anybody that was hoping to hear something that may have gone on between the end of May and the end of June 1999. But man, I was not ready to see all of these things just happening all at once. As it seems, every month or so long capsule in 1999 WWF is just said there's a lot happening between Over the Edge and King of the Ring, because it is impossible to literally get through anything WWF 1999 without addressing what happened with the fallout of Owen's death at Over the Edge. We'll start there. I do want to put out here quickly that a reminder that unless we state otherwise, we're only bringing contemporaneous accounts from that time period of what was happening regarding the incident, as the 25 years since has provided plenty of insight with what happened that night and the time that's followed. And we had referenced all of those other great resources and references that are out there, and we will again before we're done here. So we pick up with the June 7th, 1999 Wrestling Observer newsletter. And we begin with Owen Hart's funeral. So Dave Meltzer says, in a funeral described by onlookers as overwhelming, the Calgary community, the pro wrestling fraternity, and wrestling fans paid their final respects to Owen Hart at his funeral on May 31st. The funeral, which was front page news in both Calgary newspapers, saw the Alberta Premier and Calgary Mayor attend, along with former and current wrestlers from around North America. Various press estimates were that there were between 1,500 and 3,000 people, which the number is believed to be closer to the former, that attended the most publicized wrestling funeral in North America of the modern era. The WWF had most of its wrestlers and much of its front office in attendance, and the company footed the bill for wrestlers and their spouses and for office people to attend. The company rented 3 buses painted up saying, "We love you, Owen, and we miss you, Owen," to transport them to the funeral grounds. The funeral was presided over by the same reverend who performed Owen and Martha Hart's wedding in 1989, and also the funeral for Owen's nephew, Matt, in 1996. And Matt was the younger brother to Teddy Hart. He was the one that had aspirations and wishes to be a pro wrestler. He died at the age of 13. So besides just about every major WWF star, except for Steve Austin, who was reported by various media outlets as having attended, but actually wasn't there, those in attendance included names like Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, the Road Warriors, and other legendary names in the business. In addition, there were members of the Calgary Flames, Calgary Stampeders, and Calgary Hitmen in attendance at a ceremony which made people laugh and cry loudly at times at eulogies spoken by Owen's wife, Martha, along with Bret and Ross Hart. So, ceremony itself was a big deal here, obviously. Okay, so the fallout so far. And there was a lot to sort of dig through, but I just laid out a couple of bullet points, and I'd like your thoughts here. So the first is the media has used the incident to push, quote, anti-pro wrestling messaging, most of which has nothing to do with Owen's death. On the other end, defenders of wrestling, as usual, have tried to divert attention from the legitimate points that have been brought up about the problems in wrestling by citing that the vast majority of the issues brought up have little to do with the death of Owen Hart. So we're going like circular logic here, right? So the media is using a tragedy as a launching point to talk about other juicy stories, and defenders are saying, hey, what do you talk about this other stuff for? This has nothing to do with the guy falling off of a catwalk, right?
Yeah.
So the WWF has been quiet, mostly due to potential liability issues, and Vince's first appearance since Owen's death is scheduled for June 4th on Larry King. The WCW issued its memo to wrestlers that nobody in the company except for Gene Okerlund or Jimmy Hart, these are Dave's words here, not mine, not yours, I guess figuring they're the experts at double talk as opposed to some wrestlers who actually may want to honestly answer questions given to them, were allowed to discuss the issue with anyone.
Jeez.
Yeah. WWF wrestlers are equally handcuffed. On the air, they were allowed to talk about funny stories and their thoughts about Owen Hart's life, but none were allowed to say anything about his death. And here's where things get interesting. So in regards to the serious industry-wide rule of people dying young, Dave says that there's no right answers, but Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff need to spearhead this and work together, which of course nearly dooms its chances from the beginning because the wrestling promoter isn't about to give up power, voluntary or otherwise. That also guarantees that this year will break all existing records for active wrestler obituaries. And he goes on, and I'll be paraphrasing here to say, the challenge is for the leaders of the industry to show some guts instead of reacting predictably, not changing anything in a broken system, and just calling people names when they acknowledge a sickening problem. So Dave says and suggests that wrestlers in both companies need to send representatives to this sort of summit because nobody would truly understand the demands of wrestlers but them. So this almost sounds like player reps from a union, but he sees that not happening due to management's resistance and the talent fearing for their, quote, spot to be taken if they would either advocate for each other rather than toe the company line. And we've heard that then for the 25 years since, is that people don't want to step out of line.
Yep. Literally still a thing today.
So a quick note about why talent should have labor reps. And again, this is 1999. Based on the figures the WWF has released in its quest to go public, which may be held up several months until all potential lawsuits in the Hart case are known about, the company pays about 13% of its income to the performers.
Wow. 13%? That's so low.
This is a figure exceedingly low for a company of a comparable size. WCW itself pays 20%. And virtually all major league sports pay more than double that.
That's crazy to think about, that the WWF is only paying them 13% of their income to like that. It's insane.
It is. At the time, it is a private company. You know, there's a lot of things are different there. But yes, 13% of income is being paid to talent right now.
Wow.
So the profit margin for both WWF and WCW over the past year was, using total payroll of the performers as a marker, 167% for the WWF and 145% for the WCW. So profit margin over what's being paid to performers, plus 167 WWF, plus 145 WCW. So the profits are big here. Dave says that the most successful franchises in pro sports are nowhere close to that. So Dave highlights some of the media the Hart family's been doing since the incident, with their dissatisfaction with the direction of the business, and then how Owen was opposed to it, which is sort of the tours and the rounds that they're making right now. I mean, obviously they're very, very, not only, in this terrible stage of grief and loss and mourning, but they're angry. And, so they're letting their opinions, not only on what happened, but the state of the business, be known, because it was widely known that Owen wasn't happy with it either. So moving on here to the next week's Observer, the post-funeral situation publicly between Martha Hart, the widow of Owen, and Vince McMahon really turned sad this past week, largely based on McMahon airing footage of his wrestlers coming to Owen Hart's funeral against the wishes of the Hart family. In the 6-2 Calgary Sun, which was reported nationwide in Canada, Martha Hart said, quote, "I feel exploited and violated by it. I was completely repulsed by it," end quote. The story said Martha spoke directly with Vince McMahon on a couple of occasions and told him not to air any of the video from the funeral. They then quote Martha again, "I said it because I dislike their show, and airing the footage is self-serving. Not only did they disrespect me, they didn't care," end quote. Martha also said she was angry because when she came to the funeral home, there was a big heart with Owen Hart on it and WWF on the side. She said she was so disgusted with the WWF logo on it, she told them to get rid of it. Quote, "The WWF should be totally denounced for what they did. Owen was not a tacky, sleazy wrestler, and I didn't want any of the footage aired on a WWF show," end quote. Hart also noted in the story that McMahon didn't pay for the funeral. So paid for his people to go, but there was no funeral expenses paid for by the company.
But also had his logo plastered all over the funeral as well.
Well, and that's her big gripe here, is that my husband's gone and you will not benefit from it, which is why, and I don't have anything on here about it, but it's why we never got an Owen DVD. It's why we never got the Owen action figures. He was gone because they being the Hart family, didn't want the WWF to be able to essentially monetize or profit off of the nostalgia brought from somebody that they were negligent in, his passing.
Absolutely. This is good. This is crazy.
The 531 Raw, which was taped on 525 during the show, opened with King and JR. They introduced a piece which was to air clips from Calgary from the funeral, which would take place earlier in the day of when Raw would air, and then those clips would be inserted into the show. During the week after the taping, the WWF was requested not to air any footage, which ruined the pre-recorded open. During the week, they tried to convince Martha Hart that it would represent closure to the fans. However, she still asked them not to show the footage. The footage that aired showed several WWF wrestlers going to the church and a bus or two that transported the WWF wrestlers, decorated with the "We love you, Owen," and "We miss you, Owen." There was the ensuing media battle between Vince, the Harts, and the Calgary Sun. And then Dave gives all the details about Vince's open letter to Martha Hart from the newspaper, as well as the paper's response and the family's response as well. And it wasn't even worth reading, dude. Like, not out loud. Basically, Vince says that I talked with Martha and I thought she was cool with it, and I'm really sorry. And the newspaper literally writes like a editor's note in there that's like, "You said your part, Vince. Thank you. Be gone."
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, so this is getting greasy, and I guess thank God this is pre-social media, right? Because this only would have been worse.
It would have been so worse. Yeah.
So McMahon was scheduled to appear on the Larry King show, as I alluded to earlier, but according to WWF officials, he was uninvited the day of the show and replaced with Jesse Ventura. Martha Hart and Bret Hart were in Kansas City on 6/3 and 6/4 meeting with police. Police Chief Rick Easley announced on 6/4 that toxicology tests showed no trace of alcohol or drugs in Hart's body. Tests on the harness mechanism, which opened, sent Hart 91 feet to his death, showed that it had not been tampered with and no parts appeared to have been missing, according to Major George Mills of the police in an article of the Kansas City Star. Police would not comment on what was discussed. Mills said the case was still open, and once the work is complete, he's expected that they would forward the case to the prosecutors for a review as it relates to possible criminal charges being brought. Officially, the story is that Owen actually died about 6 minutes after his fall, not on impact, although he was dead by the time that he was wheeled out of the ring. And so we sort of skip forward to the lawsuit portion of this. And again, we are only going to go cliff notes here to sort of fill you in with what's going on business-wise. And there are so many other things out there. Please check them out. The expected lawsuit filed by the Hart family against a number of defendants, the main one being the World Wrestling Federation, was announced at a press conference on 6/15 in Kansas City. The lawsuit filed in the Circuit Court of Jackson County, Missouri, due to Missouri Rule 55.05, is prohibited from naming a specific dollar amount. The lawsuit's only request of the jury damages that are, quote, fair and reasonable, end quote, and also claims the WWF and other defendants should have been liable for punitive damages, claiming they ignored and sacrificed safety in favor of risky stunts. And I should note that this particular Missouri rule has led to some of the largest verdicts in the country in wrongful death cases because there is no upfront statement of damages. They just allow the jury to decide what it is. So this had potential to be a major case here. The lawsuit was filed listing Martha Hart and her children Oj and Athena and Owen's parents Stu and Helen Hart as plaintiffs. The lawsuit listed the defendants as the World Wrestling Federation, Titan Sports, Vince McMahon, Amspec Incorporation, Lumar Marine, Lipdall Company, which was responsible for manufacturing both the harness and the cable equipment used in the stunt, Linda McMahon, the 4 individuals who set up the rigging, and finally, the city of Kansas City as owners of the Kemper Arena, claiming negligence in the stunt. So the basic claim is that the WWF failed to provide a safe and proper work environment for the stunt for the 78-foot drop. The police investigation has revised the estimate of how far the fall was from the original 91 feet. So that was a revision made there in the week to follow. The 118-page lawsuit lists 46 counts against the 13 defendants. A separate criminal investigation remains ongoing, but foul play has already been discounted. And we wrap the Owen situation and fallout with, from the June 28th Observer, there are no major revelations in the 118-page Hart family lawsuit against the WWF, Vince and Linda McMahon, the riggers and the companies that manufactured the equipment used in the stunt that killed Owen Hart. We just noted the basic claim, and this is certainly where, again, check out Dark Side of the Ring. If you are an Observer subscriber or know somebody that is, go back and read through those May issues, the June issues from 1999, and then all of the fallout, especially coming up through the Dark Side of the Ring. When that episode came, Dave was on fire, just basically backfilling a whole bunch of information. So there's a lot to read and there's a lot to watch. Please check those things out. And we wrap up the Owen situation with, it should be noted that the Hart family was awarded $18 million in a settlement on November 2000. Okay, so that will close the book on Owen for now. It's certainly not going to be the last time that we speak about him, but we are going to move from one lawsuit to another in just a minute. Before we do, I do want to note from the June 7th Observer, sort of skipped over because I wanted to cover all of Owen up front. Women's bodybuilder Trish Stratus is receiving feelers from both WWF and WCW. And UPN officials have told the AP that the SmackDown show will be a much tamer version of Raw, specifically citing less explicit language and lewd gestures. Media Week did a story on the new television season, and when talking about the new SmackDown show, wrote, Thursday's 2-hour WWF SmackDown is a show that may save the network, a deal where the World Wrestling Federation sells commercials and UPN receives the revenue and promo spots. In other words, the WWF is buying the time and keeping the commercial time for itself. So an interesting little setup here, but SmackDown is coming, and I'm sure that we'll cover that later on.
Yes, we will be covering that in August.
So we are now at the next major story here. Again, this was a multi-week endeavor, and this one is strictly litigation. So whereas the Owen arc went from the funeral to the fallout to then the lawsuit, we're just going to hit the ground running right here with the court filing. So from the June 14th, 1999 Wrestling Observer newsletter, pro wrestling's latest spill into the national headlines came with Rena Mero's $140 million lawsuit filed on 6/3 against Titan Sports and her subsequent quitting of the company. The lawsuit has inspired a lot of snap judgment, a lot of which is probably fair because, quote, while there may be some merit to some of her complaints about the direction of the WWF, she was one of the prime beneficiaries of the change, end quote. Dave goes on to say, there's more to the suit than meets the eye, but certainly not $140 million worth more. Some, including those in the WWF, were attempting to babyface the company since on the surface, the lawsuit seems ridiculous, particularly the monetary damages asked for, and because people are suspicious of the timing of it coming so soon after the WWF garnered so much bad publicity. And there's also the timing of the WWF talking about going public and other major lawsuits outstanding that isn't going to thrill the underwriters. But there is no good guy versus bad guy in this story. So the lawsuit itself, filed in U.S. District Court in Bridgeport, Connecticut, has been building up for several months as the problems between the two sides have existed for about a year, but became known somewhat publicly around the time of the Royal Rumble. So Sable was pulled from the show in her scheduled strap match against Luna, but wound up a few days later having the booking put back and doing the show. And we were doing this. We reviewed these through the Mania 15 episode, right? Where we started going through that timeline. And seeing this will actually provided me with, and I hope it provides you with and the listeners with more context to this situation, because it really was dodgy, hodgepodgey. She's on, she's off. We know she's not happy. So this sort of provides the timeline for that.
Gotcha.
So at that point, she made it clear she didn't want to wrestle regularly anymore, claiming it as being dangerous and citing the fact that she wasn't a trained wrestler and hadn't signed to be a wrestler. Because she was the WWF Women's Champ at the time, that didn't endear her to the wrestlers, and that led to heat backstage and other problems. There had also been heat building up between the Meros and the company when at one point she and Mark Mero asked for their releases, but things were temporarily worked out and they wound up staying. The WWF management then paints Mark Mero as a villain. If you remember this storyline, that he was manipulating his wife. He then gets booked into a loser must retire match. He loses, and then they don't use him anymore. They're paying him, but they're not using him anymore. Rena Mero, saying she wasn't under contract as a wrestler, but as a television performer, didn't want to appear on a full-time schedule on house shows, was willing to appear but not wrestle on television, but was willing to wrestle on more lucrative pay-per-view shows. So this double standard didn't endear her to many people in the back. And then Dave says, while many WCW performers have similar deals, not even the top-level WWF performers have them. The situation's only made worse because management put up with it to a degree since her popularity exploded. She earned an estimated $750,000 to $1 million last year. Her magazine covers such as Playboy and TV Guide did huge sales. Her video, Sable Unleashed, ranked for months only behind Steve Austin on the sports and rec charts, which videos, home releases, DVDs at that point in time is huge. Mm-hmm. And she was realistically the company's biggest television ratings draw this past year, despite her in-ring and acting shortcomings. We'll get to the ratings things in a minute, because if you remember, she was not a draw in 98.
No.
Even in the middle of all the fully loaded and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But in 99, it changes. So she's a legit ratings draw here. The general consensus was, more than almost anyone else, Rena Mero was the beneficiary of McMahon and the Titan Sports Machine's true marketing genius, as her push was considered right place, right time, especially with having Tammy Cinch open the door for her and then self-destruct. Because when the internet sort of came out, and I know that you were a puppy pup here, but Sunny was the most downloaded woman on the internet.
I remember that. I do remember people talking about that.
Yeah, like I mean, and not only was she marketable in that way, but she was great on the microphone.
Hmm?
She could work. She would take little bumps and things like that. Like she was really really in on the business. But she had a myriad of problems herself. And Dave actually went into some of them where she did not like being sort of pitted, her versus Sable on for TV time. And then she was having substance issues and all those other things were going on. So then she self-destructs, she leaves the company or gets fired, whichever. And then now it's the Sable show. So problems actually began last April after the WWF Unforgiven pay-per-view show. Sable did her first evening gown match against Luna and wound up in her lingerie. The show was headlined by Steve Austin's first title defense against Mankind and drew a 0.85 buy rate, which was a surprisingly high figure based on standards at the time. Sable felt she deserved an equal payoff to Austin for the show, claiming she was at least equally, if not more, responsible for the buy rate. So it sort of makes you want to roll your eyes, right?
Yeah.
But this is so weird, dude. So check this out. That attitude garnered her heat in the locker room. Although, in hindsight, if you look at the numbers, the Austin versus Mankind rematch the next month without Sable did a 0.58 buy rate, well below the normal standard for such a show at the time. Her next major appearance teasing skin was the now famous bikini contest on the Fully Loaded pay-per-view, where Sable came out with only body paint on, which drew a 0.90 buy rate without a singles match on top. So this was Undertaker and Austin versus Kane and Mankind as the headliner.
Mm-hmm.
However, so like, and this is, I literally wrote here, this audience is weird.
It really is.
However, this was basically the same buy rate for the next two In Your House events where she didn't play a major role. So she is part of the reason in her eyes that this buy rate spikes.
Mm-hmm.
It immediately goes down. It makes her look better. It goes back up because we're using her again. But then we don't use her and the buy rates stay the same.
So, yeah, so her argument doesn't actually follow through.
It doesn't hold water, but this is one of those things where with context, you can actually see where she's saying, where's my money? And they're saying, bro, it ain't you. Like, right. It's really interesting.
It's like she took that one instance where it went down in the rematch, and that was her whole argument, but it didn't hold any merit for everything else that happened afterwards.
Correct. And the other thing about it is that, and even if she wasn't incredibly vocal at the time, maybe she just asked for the payoff, didn't get it, that was it, people don't forget. Right. And so that's not like she's not going to keep that in her back pocket to use maybe for leverage later on, which we'll get to. So Sable was not a television ratings draw in 1998. And we actually covered that in that Mania 15 show. We talked about the end of year, who isn't a draw, all that other stuff from 1998. Despite being one of the company's most popular performers and getting huge reactions whenever she came out. But in 1999, when fans were conditioned to the idea that seeing Sable meant women undressing on television and coinciding with the Playboy Centerfold publicity, she became the biggest consistent ratings draw in wrestling. It is believed the first spread for Playboy paid her in the range of $150,000 plus a small piece of the magazine's increase in business, which probably resulted in a total payoff of more than $200,000. She signed a deal to do a second cover in Centerfold, scheduled for an August release. Again, we're in June here, which is probably another reason things got to where they did. The WWF not only allowed, but brokered and encouraged the first deal and was involved in the timing of it, feeling that it would be great publicity for WrestleMania. It was, and then helped get her over to where her value as a celebrity and to a TV ratings draw increased from the exposure. They did. Mero at first turned down the Playboy offer, but wound up acquiescing when the money deal was upped. Found this out then. The WWF actually agreed to pay Sable a bonus above what the magazine was already paying her, and then also agreed not to take a cut of the deal as it normally would, as they were her agent for third-party promotions. So that's how they got her to do it. They basically sweetened the pot and said, we're not going to take a cut here. So then she did it. Okay. For the second deal, the magazine went straight to Miro, who inked the deal without the magazine going through Jim Bell at Titan Sports, who, by contract, would have served as her agent since she was using the name Sable and using her marketing license, both of which the company owned. There's no doubt that a large part of the reason that the first spread sold so well was because it was pushed to death on WWF television, we saw, and without a similar television push, the second spread wouldn't have anywhere near the success. Dave also notes that it's doubtful the second spread would have the same success because it's no longer a novelty. He also says, in failing to get a cut from either side, since Mero and Playboy reached their own agreement, the WWF threatened to legally get the magazine to stop publishing the photo spread because of her use of the name Sable. This dispute was one of the reasons both Meros came to the television taping on 5/10 asking for a release from their 3-year contracts from the WWF. The WWF offered both a release, allowing Mark to get a full release, which meant he'd be able to work for WCW or anywhere else, but Sable would have a non-compete clause, meaning she couldn't work in wrestling until August of 2001, nor be able to use the name Sable in future marketing for herself or for her attempts to become an actress after her appearance on Pacific Blue did garner some huge ratings for the show. Lawyers for both sides couldn't come to an agreement on the WWF's proposed release terms, and part of the lawsuit appears to be her attempt at being able to use the name Sable and keep the Playboy spread, which in the sales over the magazine's monthly average, from being tied up in court. Why the WWF is playing hardball on the photo spread probably stems from the problems the company had dealing with her. They wanted her to drop the women's title in a match. She was agreeable to dropping the title, but wanted to script out the manner in which it would happen, which would not be in a match since she was no longer willing to wrestle. The 24-page lawsuit claims the WWF controls its performers through carefully designed programs of intimidation and humiliation, including scripted sexual provocation in and out of the ring, and stage stunts that are inherently dangerous under contracts that absolve the WWF of all responsibility. It claims the WWF repeatedly wanted her to be exposed on national television through a, quote, scripted mistake, which she repeatedly refused to do. She says that after making those refusals, she was called a prima donna by Vince McMahon and was told the WWF would move on. It should be noted that the WWF had booked an evening gown match for Sable at the UK pay-per-view on 5/16, covered in the archives. It was originally advertised that the loser would be stripped to nothing but a bikini bottom. After Sable voiced complaints, the match was switched to being a regular match without these stipulations, then changed to where Sable simply appeared and didn't wrestle, claiming she had a cold, and then actually both sides at her behest had agreed that she wouldn't wrestle on the show anyways, and Nicole Bass took her place in a 27-second match. So there's the context for all of that. That big hodgepodge mess was she is in a big dispute, wants a release, doesn't get a release, says I'm not going to wrestle, and then that's where we get the Nicole Bass deal.
And the turd in the cup by X-Pac.
Oh, that's coming too. Mero suggested losing the title, asked that it didn't happen on television. McMahon disagreed, saying that if she didn't appear at the 5/10 Live Raw Live in Orlando to drop the title, there would be a breach of contract. She still refused and brought her lawyers to the taping and wrote down her own terms for agreeing to drop the title, which led to the ridiculous scenario they did where Deborah ended up with the belt. Again, remember going through that and being like, how did this even happen?
Yeah, because Michaels came out and did all that. It just made no sense. It was wild. It just,
well,
yeah, we talked about that.
Right. And I wasn't ready to find this out. So I'm going to read the handwritten contract that was agreed upon the day of the show. Okay. Notwithstanding any agreement between us and because we disagree about the fashion I should lose my belt, and because of my concerns of humiliation and safety, it is agreed that I appear tonight solely upon your contractual assurances that I will not lose my gown nor wrestle, and that the girl with whom I am interfacing agrees with her role. My appearance in Manchester shall be no more than parading in the ring and shall not include wrestling. I agree to make a scheduled personal appearance outside the ring. Otherwise, I will have complete hiatus from the WWF until May 23rd, at which time we will hope to have our contractual concerns resolved. Until such time, neither I nor the WWF, its employees or subcontractors shall speak disparagingly about the other, scripted or unscripted. That reads like a handwritten contract. So basically, she refused to do a match to drop the title, and the agreement between the two sides forbids them from disparaging comments about her doing so. So she can't say anything bad. They can't say anything bad. She's going to drop the title, but she's not going to do it in a match. That was literally agreed to the day before that show, and that's how that happened. So she then claimed to be placed in dangerous and morally compromising situations, not only with creative, but also, and this being tied to roid rage, wrestlers regularly threatened to beat her up outside the ring, and specifically pointed to a wrestler threatening to bite her face and ruin her career, claiming the WWF did little to alleviate the abuses in its own offices, regularly participating in the vulgarity. She then complained about another certain announcing byplay involving Shawn Michaels and Jerry Lawler during one of her segments, which would have violated the agreed upon deal that she had set. He then breaks down the different claims. There's $10 million for that she was lied to negotiations, $10 million for contract breach, $10 million for working in an unsafe environment, $10 million after damages that she suffered after leaving the environment, and then the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act. So that is basically the Sable lawsuit and situation, as condensed as I can get. Holy cow, did we Mongoose reads there.
That was a lot. I can't believe all of the things that she was asking for in this lawsuit, which they're not bad, but also at the same time, like, she's taking some liberties in saying that she's more than what she really is.
Well, and the most difficult thing about it is that the timing, because obviously her legal advice would have been, they are in the muck right now.
Yeah.
We might be able to get a nice settlement here or whatever, but it really doesn't look good whenever you're seeing her throw out $140 million and there's a lawsuit that just got served where a man died.
Right. It feels disingenuous.
Yeah, it's really it's a mucky murky situation, man. And you know, these situations usually are. And I did appreciate that more than one time David said in there that there's no right, there's no wrong, there's no winner, there's no loser. Like there's a lot of gray here. You know, basically leave it up to your own judgment. In hindsight, what's wild is not only does she come back, but she comes back probably more exploited in 03, 04.
Way more exploited.
Or 02 than she was then.
Yeah. Even way worse when we get to the Ruthless Aggression era.
Yeah, with the Tory stuff. And
the Tory stuff, and yeah, so much more.
That's wild. So a couple of notes from the 14th Observer to sort of break this up a little bit. Terry Funk beat Sabu in a match billed as One Last Dance for Apocalypse Wrestling on 6/6 in Ontario before 653 fans. Funk announced the night before on the Fan Sports radio show that it was his retirement match. He's 55 in a few weeks, and it's time. It's also about his 55th or 56th retirement match since 1983, when he retired for the first time, saying he didn't want to still be wrestling after his 40th birthday. I should note that this is after the Dennis Stamp deal, and this is also before Terry Funk returns to in January 2000 to the WCW and wrestles Bret Hart.
He can never get away.
It can never get away, man. The WCW will be doing a Saturday night taping in Johnstown, PA on June 8th. Mick Foley had both of his knees scoped by Dr. James Andrew and is expected to be out of action until late July. And The Undertaker is being bothered even more by an arthritic hip and back cramping, which explains a lot of his either non-work or bad work at this point in time, just so you know. So we move on to the June 21st Observer. Things go from bad to weird, I guess, for the lawsuit and litigation thing. So we start with Rena Mero's appearance on WCW Nitro on 6/14 while still under contract to the WWF raises a lot of legal questions. Mero was seated in the front row at Nitro with numerous camera close-ups coming out just before 10 p.m. in a Kevin Nash interview. The crowd reacted big to her to the point that while Nash was attempting to do his interview, there was a huge Sable chant. In addition, there was a sign posted in what may have been a plant shown clearly on camera saying Sable 1, Vince McMahon 0. There were numerous close-ups of her waving at the camera for the remainder of the show. However, she was never identified as Sable or Rena Mero. John, are you familiar with this appearance?
I'm actually not. I didn't know this was a thing.
Really?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Man.
At all.
Okay, so let me give you a little bit of context here, and I'll ruin one of your upcoming days whenever you do a network dive. So she not only makes this appearance, but there is a storyline where Kevin Nash gets hit by, I believe it is a Humvee, okay?
Yeah, okay.
And
I heard about this.
And they allude to Rena Mero could have been the Humvee driver.
Oh, I saw this on Twitter, and I saw that he was... Okay, this makes so much more sense now. Okay.
And then Sid debuts, and they were like, it was a blonde person, and people think, oh, it was Sid. And Bischoff is on the internet saying, like, no, it was a woman. Like, so it's pretty wild, man. So I don't know what they were cooking up behind the scenes. I mean, on the face of it, we're just trying to get attention right now.
Right.
But yeah, man, from the way the dots looked like they were connecting, Rena Mero might have been pitched to have been the person that ran over Kevin Nash with a Humvee.
Wow. That's actually hilarious. Okay, that makes sense. I saw that last week all over Twitter. Makes sense now.
Oh, there you go. Because that would have been like a This Week in Wrestling or whatever kind of deal. The WCW is trying to say that she bought a ticket to the show, but her WWF contract specifically forbids her from making an appearance on this type on WCW broadcasts. Dave does note the 95 Lex Luger appearance, but says that one actually had the WWF's hands tied because Luger's lawyer found a breach in contract. So unless there is a breach that can be found, which Mero is claiming in that lawsuit, but there is nothing official yet, that she's out of luck. That Lex was not pursued legally because the breach was found to be, legit. That does not appear to be the case for Rena Mero.
Okay.
The game gets interesting on several accounts because WCW and WWF both have outstanding lawsuits. Mero had the much publicized lawsuit against the WWF, and perhaps the feeling in WCW is that WWF has so many legal problems at present. There's actually a third lawsuit that was filed over the past 2 weeks by a Kuwaiti television announcer that was roughed up by Vader, who this past week sued the WWF for $1.5 million. So they have that, they have the Hart lawsuit, and then the Mero lawsuit, that they wouldn't want to add another one. However, not defending their contracts sets a dangerous precedent on both sides unless there is some proof that there was a breach that makes Mero's situation different from usual protocol. If the WWF doesn't do anything about this in such a highly publicized situation, the precedent is now set that talent can leave the company while under contract and show up on the rival show, but that can go in both directions. So Bill Goldberg is in a contract dispute right now. And Dave says, who's to say that Bill Goldberg can't now show up on Raw? And the WWF can say, well, you just did it.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that too, because wasn't that loosely idea pitched with Kevin Nash saying that him and Goldberg could go to Raw and do like an interpromotional thing? That was loosely alleged to. We don't know if that's true, but that was alleged to in the Observers.
Correct. Where they were kicking around those sort of ideas, and they were always nixed because it all stemmed from that 96 lawsuit with Hall and Nash in the first place,
right? Where
they were basically, getting across the idea that we still work for Vince rather. Mm-hmm. And then Vince wanted explicitly stated, no, you do not, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's sort of what killed that, was that people were pitching around ideas, dipping their toe in the water, but not really going full bore with it.
Okay.
So the most recent thing with this actually was Flair, whenever he was suing the WCW and he was off TV in 98, was being talked to about showing up on the Unforgiven pay-per-view in Greensboro. And then basically WWF attorneys end up advising against it because they didn't want to deal with any of the ramifications because of what had happened previously. So this is something that's been happening, but WCW now actually goes with it, right? And so that's sort of where this ripple effect is coming from. The WWF sent a cease and desist to Rena Mero saying that they have suspended her usage of the name Sable. And then from this point in time, she would only be able to use her real name. They're saying that this is basically a ploy from the WWF to strong arm her, to help make her acquiesce, because they are saying, it's reported here rather, that she is getting $850,000. That is what the WWF believes for this shoot.
Oh,
and so if you want to know why WWF got mad and wants a cut now, it's because they gave her a bonus last time. She probably made $200,000, $250,000 or whatever. And Playboy's now giving her almost $1 million, and they're not getting a cut, and she's using their name, and they've had heat backstage. So that's basically where we got here. Wrapping up Sable here with, while nobody specifically named in either the Roid Rage or threats against her in the lawsuit, it is common belief that when it comes to the threats to disfigure her face and beat her up in the ring, that those threats were made by Gertrude Vashon Heath, who is Luna. And to say that the WWF did nothing about it, if it really was Mrs. Heath, would be incorrect, because she was fired shortly thereafter for those and similar actions.
I'm glad that you actually had that at the end, because I wanted to ask you who was going to bite Sable in the face, but it makes total sense why it's going to be Luna.
Yep. So to go back to Goldberg before we move on and get into our Raws and our show, Goldberg appeared for WCW this week at Toy Fair in New York and told people there that it was inevitable in 3 years he would face Austin. There had apparently been some backdoor communication between the two discussing the feasibility and idea of when each other's contracts run out, they would either be in the same company or on their own try to put together a show where they'd headline against each other, as unlikely as that would be.
I am so happy you brought this up, because we literally talked about this it was either the Backlash 04 show or the WrestleMania 20 show. This is huge and literally confirms that they were talking about this in 1999, and then they were almost going to do it post WrestleMania when both of them were gone, and that they were in talks to do their own promoted show, essentially like All In. And this literally confirms that.
Yep. Yeah, there you go, man.
So all of those people that said that in the comments that were saying, this ain't true, this ain't going to happen. Well, guess what? It's literally confirmed right here.
And the thing is it didn't happen. They're not wrong, but it's not like it wasn't being talked about. That's just it.
It's on the show. It's an idea.
Yep. So there you go, man. I saw that and I was like, man, John's gonna explode. So there you go. We wrap up the Sable deal for now with and this is from the June 28th Observer. After about a week, it's even less clear what the WCW hoped to accomplish when putting Rena Mero on Nitro on 6/14. While it was the talk of wrestling for the week that didn't amount to anything in ratings, the ensuing Thunder show dropped even lower than the ratings marks in the recent weeks, and it opened the WCW up to legal action, which seemed stupid because that's all her appearance really did was give WWF leverage in that kind of situation. He says the WCW's explanation that she came and bought her own ticket was ridiculous. She sat in the front row with security guards around her and arrived at the 10 p.m. mark. So it does really make it seem like it was all set up. And then Jerry McDevitt comes thundering in, man. And he basically says that she breached her deal with us, that she was out of line, and that no way because of this that she's ever getting the name Sable, no matter how many lawsuits that she files. So Jerry McDevitt comes in with a blowtorch and says this is never going to happen. The one thing that I do want to note to finish this up is, even though the WWF suspended Mero from using the name Sable, there is promotion being done for her appearance on 624's Jay Leno show, still billing her as World Wrestling Federation star Sable. However, I'm thinking that because this is more Playboy centric because of the monies, that's not really something that they're going to be too concerned with at that point in time.
Yeah.
And before we get to our Raws, I leave you with this. It appears the WCW is almost completely given up on signing Chris Jericho. Titan is pitching Jericho on the idea that he's going to be the next Shawn Michaels. And the WWF tried to get Austin on the Jay Leno show to respond to the Goldberg challenge. The Leno people thought that it would be great if he accepted, but then when Titan told him he wasn't going to accept, they didn't want him on the show.
And that's a great point that you brought up about Chris Jericho, because spoiler alert, we're going to be doing when Jericho comes into the WWF later this year. That will be a show in and of itself. So great lead in for that as well.
So John, there was so much to dig through. I did the best that I could to try to condense it down, to pack as much information as possible. But now let's get into actual wrestling on this wrestling show. So I'm going to kick it over to you. Could you please give us some highlights from the May 31st, 1999 Raw show?
Yes, the Raw rundown here that we have from May 31st is that Triple H beat Mankind after China low blows Mankind with a sledgehammer. Triple H then destroys Mankind's knee with the sledgehammer, and after the match, Mankind leaves in the ambulance.
So this angle explains the time off for the knee surgery. Noted that before, just got double knee surgery. This writes him off.
Yes. Steve Austin beat The Undertaker via disqualification in the main event. After a stunner, the corporate ministry ran out and tied him up on the ropes. The show ended with a druid facing off with Austin, unmasking, but only Austin saw it, and Austin freaking out as the show went off the air.
Dave Meltzer notes that fans in the building thought that it was Vince under the costume. Dave says maybe it'll end up being Linda or Stephanie.
Wow.
But it's just interesting that right there, he's reporting that the higher power was Vince at the time. I do want to say before we move on to the next week that this show did a 6.23 rating and a 10.1 share. So a huge rating here. The main event with Austin and The Undertaker did a 6.8 final quarter and a 7.3 overrun. We'll talk about that at some point in time because these two end up having the biggest match rating in the history of the show.
Yeah.
All right, brother. So June 7th, Raw from Boston, the higher power reveal. Go ahead.
We finally made it here. The show opened with a long Vince interview. He challenged Shane to put up his 50% of the company, and he would put up his 50% of the company. Winner takes all for control of WWF. The corporate ministry came out. The higher power is introduced. He makes his way to the ring. Shane comes out saying, "I told you it wasn't me." Vince is on the screen saying, "Have the demon reveal himself." You can nearly see 3/4 of Vince's face with the camera shot before. He throws the hood back and screams, "It's me, Austin. It's me all along."
So Dave notes before they did this, during the promo, The Undertaker talked about, quote, the day of reckoning being here. This is just one of these, that was the same words that Martha said to Vince at Owen's funeral. So they just can't get out of their own way, man. Right. Apparently the plan for Vince to be the higher power wasn't decided until last minute, as several were considered. Mick Foley was among those asked, and he turned it down, as the plan apparently was to turn a top babyface heel for this at first. I did want to note that after Over the Edge, or at Over the Edge, the show changed a little with the Owen incident, where the Austin and Undertaker title match was scheduled to have the same basic storyline, with Shane screwing over Austin for the title. Vince comes back to tease the idea of saving the day. However, there were probably modifications made, and how they got there in Vince's role in screwing him might have been teased slightly more in the original plans, because the original greater power angle was, according to what they've been told, they being the observer, the greater power angle was, according to what Dave was told earlier in the week, scheduled to be shot at the pay-per-view. And then the revelation of McMahon was scheduled for the next night on Raw. So the original plans were for McMahon to run in as the babyface, there to be some teases. Who is this higher power? What's happened? And then the next night, it's the reveal right after he's the big babyface the night before.
Okay. That would have made more sense, I feel. But
right.
That Over the Edge, obviously they couldn't do that.
Correct. All right, man. So is there anything else of note for the rest of this show?
Yes. Linda and Stephanie came out, and they said that they had a board of directors meeting that day, announced Steve Austin as the new CEO. So if you are new to the channel and you saw all of those Austin at WWF offices last week in the shorts, this is it right here. And this is why, because Vince was revealed as the higher power. Linda and Stephanie gave over their percent of shares to Steve Austin, so he was able to then be CEO for the day. The main event of this show was Undertaker versus Big Show. It ended in a no contest when Big Show chokeslammed Undertaker through the ring. Show chokeslammed both Acolytes and Mideon after the match as well.
This show drew a 6.68 rating and a 10.6 share, which is the second highest competitive rating in history, trailing only the week that should be thrown out because it was the week after Owen Hart's, or the show after Owen Hart's death. So they are cranking out the ratings right now. The highest rated segment on this show, however, was not the higher power reveal.
Wow.
It was a Deborah Nicole Bass bikini contest, which drew a 7.13 quarter. The higher power quarter was a 7.03.
Like you said earlier, the audience is weird at this point.
This audience, man. All right, so June 14th from Worcester, John.
We have Shane and Vince. They announce all sorts of gimmick matches. They include Road Dogg versus Billy Gunn in a dog collar match. We have a blindfolded test versus the Big Boss Man. Ken Shamrock in a straight jacket versus Jeff Jarrett.
Not in a straight jacket.
Right. So Ken Shamrock's in a straight jacket. Jeff Jarrett is not. Briscoe and Patterson versus Mideon and Viscera. And this actually doesn't even happen on the show. So this show also has Rock challenging Undertaker for the title at King of the Ring. He accepted, but Vince said only if Rock could beat Taker in a non-title match on TV first. The main event was then Rock versus Undertaker. It turned into a triple threat, adding Triple H. The Rock pinned Triple H after a rock bottom in the People's Elbow. After the match, Undertaker and Triple H fought each other, bringing out the corporate ministry to break them up.
And just so everybody knows, that blindfolded test versus Big Boss Man match literally was Boss Man just beating blindfolded test to death with a nightstick. All right. So the 614 Raw show drew what should be labeled as the most impressive rating in the history of the show. While on paper it was the fourth highest ever rated Raw, the 6.66, oh my gosh, rating and the 10.7 share was more impressive than previous high water marks. The record-setting 8.19 was done on an unopposed week. That's in the archives.
Yes.
And the other high numbers were related to Owen's death and the higher power. So without there being a huge storyline coming or without being unopposed, Dave says that that's the most, or one of the most impressive ratings they've ever done. So we're hopping over to June 21st from Memphis.
Yes, this is the Go Home Raw before King of the Ring. The show started with Triple H and Chyna challenging Undertaker. Vince talked about Austin dumping manure in Vince's office and the smell that was in there. Austin came out first and then Michaels. This also, like, those shorts are on the channel. So if you are listening here and you don't know what we're talking about, just go to the shorts section of the channel. You'll see exactly with the manure and everything in Vince's office right there.
And this segment ends with the famous Briscoe and Patterson doing the HBK flex to Michael's song.
Mr. Ass and the Acolytes beat Road Dogg and X-Pac and Kane in about a minute when Billy pinned X-Pac with a famouser on a chair. This was somehow for the tag titles after Pac challenged Billy and they accepted, which is why Billy came to the ring with the belt in his first King of the Ring match, which we're going to get into in a little bit here. So in the main event of this match, Undertaker beat Triple H via DQ in the main event to retain the WWF Championship. The Rock ran in for the DQ and laid out Undertaker.
And the one thing that I have about ratings here is that this actually was the lowest combined audience to watch wrestling in a long time. So Raw's rating was down to a 5.99. Nitro only did a 3.09. The two companies combined for a 9.41 head-to-head rating, which was 10.7 million viewers, which is well down from the peak of 12 million viewers in good weeks. And generally, and at that time, they were generally topping 11 million before WCW started its free fall. But because the WWF was running so high, those numbers stayed up. But now the WWF had a little bit of a lull week here. And so the ratings numbers are down overall. It's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So that's sort of the Raw recap as to where we are leading into this show. John, you want to get us started here with some King of the Ring?
Yes, our main event of the show today is King of the Ring 1999, and we'll start with some King of the Ring history as this tournament over the decade literally crowned the next big thing. From 85 to 91, the King of the Ring was a local market show in New England, but it gave us Don Morocco, Harley Race, Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase, Tito Santana, and Bret Hart as winners. Since it became a pay-per-view in 1993, the winners are Bret, Owen, Mabel, Austin, Triple H, and Ken Shamrock. While not everyone who was just listed was a slam dunk, there are true legends. And I guess this is the perfect segue because I'm just going to get out before we jump into our review. This is the worst pay-per-view of the Attitude Era. It sucks. They do not give a rat's ass about the King of the Ring at all. It's literally filler so that they can get to the big matches, and the big matches are McMahon's versus Austin and Undertaker versus Rock. If it wasn't for those two matches, all these other matches don't even matter. They don't even count. Just throw them out the window.
Dave says basically what you do. Before I get into that, I will tell the audience that the King of the Ring took place on June 27th, 1999, came to you from the Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina. Observer readers gave this show 12.6% thumbs up, 79.7% thumbs down, and 7.7% thumbs in the middle. Best match was Matt and Jeff Hardy versus Christian and Edge. Worst match was The Big Show versus Kane. The show drew a legitimate sellout of 19,761 fans. It was announced as 2018 on television, which was 18,574 people paying $574,200 with another $110,692 in merchandise. So Dave says that this is the first pay-per-view since the ill-fated Over the Edge show and a bevy of lawsuits that have been filed against them in that time. And there were some notable changes whenever it came to the King of the Ring. Whether they were good, bad, or coincidental depends on your points of view, but the show itself was well below the usual standard for a WWF, or for that matter, WCW or ECW pay-per-view event. The biggest change was a much more careful in-ring style. There were a few bumps, but not many, and all were done carefully. And then Dave notes that some of this is probably because there's no Foley there. The King of the Ring tournament, which didn't admittedly look good on paper, was even worse in practice. Dave notes the logical finals would be Billy Gunn versus X-Pac, but maybe too many people were getting hip to the game. So he says, as the week went on, suddenly word came out there was a video box cover for the upcoming King of the Ring tape with Big Show on the cover of the box and the caption stating, quote, "See the Big Show go through 8 men en route to winning the King of the Ring," end quote. Dave says since word spreads fast these days, which in hindsight appears to be a plant, this made Paul White somewhat of a favorite going in. So they planted their own fake winner.
That makes a lot of sense too, because a lot of the promotional stuff you see, kind of like with WrestleMania 2000, where the poster that you originally see is not what you get. Yep. The promotional photo for this is literally Big Show.
Yep. As it was, the King of the Ring matches were rushed with the exception of Road Dogg versus Chyna, which is the only thing close to an average match in the tournament. And the fact that the matches were rushed seems really strange, with the show ending 22 minutes early.
Yes. And my only thing about that is that makes sense because these matches, these King of the Ring qualifying matches to start the show are only about 3 minutes apiece, except for what we'll get into it here. But these matches are so short. They're car crash. We get through 4 matches before we even get in the first hour of the show. So our first match is Hardcore Holly versus X-Pac. This is the first set of, these are the quarterfinals of the King of the Ring tournament. And just like the Hardcore Holly that we love, he had a car dropped on him earlier in the week on Raw, and now he's out here to win King of the Ring. That car was dropped on him by Big Show. X-Pac went for a standard Bronco Buster early, but Holly was able to move out of the way. It didn't matter because Pac was able to hit the Buster on Holly, at which he did roll out of the ring. He grabbed a chair. He hit X-Pac with it and disqualified himself. Of course, Hardcore Holly loses in a DQ. in a quarterfinals match for King of the Ring. This only makes sense for Hardcore Holly himself.
It's hardcore, man. Dave says that there was no heat for the match except for X-Pac's Bronco ride spot, but it was all action. After the match, Holly gave X-Pac a neck breaker, giving him the neck injury to sell for the rest of the show, which is the same angle they did pre-show with Ken Shamrock. Dud.
Backstage with Terry Taylor interviewing Hardcore Holly. Holly popped me huge here when he said nobody cares who you are to Taylor. But Holly says he hasn't forgotten what Big Show did to him on Monday when he got the card dropped on him. Our second match in our quarterfinals of the King of the Ring is Big Show versus Kane. I feel like I've said this a lot lately, but Kane is out here with his working boots on. Brother pulled out a standing enziguri. Both men were knocked after double big boots, but Kane would get up first. He came off the top rope for a signature clothesline. The ref takes a bump on a Big Show big boot, and Kane gives Show a low blow. Hardcore Holly runs in to get his revenge on Big Show, but instead he eats a chokeslam from Kane. The ref is still down, and Kane tried to chokeslam Big Show, but used a steel chair on him instead and goes for the pin. The ref wakes up, and Kane moves on as he wins his qualifying match.
Yeah, that double big boot spot was so bad.
It sucked.
They both missed each other by 40 feet and both took massive bumps on it. Dave says Show wrestles more like Andre every day, and that isn't a compliment as he was missing moves all over the place. Kane took the chair and chokeslammed Holly. Kane then choked Show forever. Dude, he did.
He did. He literally
months
holding that thing in there.
And more important than that, Kane clocked him with a chair for the pin. -1 star.
Michael Cole is backstage with Vince, and Vince says that Shane needs to go to the hospital, but Shane is yelling in the background saying that he's okay. Vince isn't going to let Shane wrestle in the main event, which leads us to our next match, which is another quarterfinals in the King of the Ring tournament. It is Billy Gunn versus Ken Shamrock. Now, Ken Shamrock, earlier on Heat, he was beat down by Shane, so he has quote-unquote internal bleeding. So that's why Shamrock is acting so strange in this show. So Billy comes out first for his promo and says that he's going over the world's most dangerous horse's ass. And I hope that he ran that one by the boys because that is the shits. Shamrock here has internal bleeding, like I said, from his beatdown. Billy basically wins this match via ref stoppage. It's literally like 3 minutes long. Shamrock's really selling the fact that he's hurt really badly here.
The interesting thing with this is that, and I should say first, Dave Meltzer says, even with the pre-match angle, the match had no heat. So that's like 3 matches in a row with no heat, and we are going to be at a combined -0.5 star after 3 matches here. But I thought this was interesting. This finish was apparently taken from the Shamrock versus Vader match at the FMW Stadium show in 1997, when Shamrock had legit internal injuries and was powerbombed by Vader about halfway into the match, started coughing up blood, which was legit, and they stopped the match.
Actually didn't know that.
Yeah, half star. But it was jacked from a real finish. The crazy thing here is that we read so much about heel Steve Blackman, and I didn't think that we were ever going to get that payoff.
Yeah.
And we did. It is what it is, man.
Yeah, this match was not good. And this is literally like 10 minutes of the show. We just ran through 3 matches in this backstage stuff. We're like 10 to 15 minutes into the show. So China is backstage with Kevin Kelly, and she says that when she was a little girl, she wanted to be a princess, but now she wants to be queen. Hunter pops in to say that he's not helping Undertaker in his match tonight and that he doesn't take orders from others. And that leads us into our final quarterfinal match for the King of the Ring, which is China versus Road Dogg. And after seeing these quick 3 matches, this feels like an eternity. China continues to dominate, but then Road Dogg ends up getting her in a sleeper hold, but Hunter is there to save her and puts her foot on the rope for the rope break, and then Hunter hits Road Dogg with a chain wrapped around his fists. Commissioner Michaels comes down to stop Hunter, sends him to the back. China then low-blowed Road Dogg, but he was wearing a cup. He gets the win against China, and he moves on in this tournament.
Dave Meltzer says, at first I should say that this was 13 minutes and 19 seconds, whereas the other tournament matches were literally all like 3 minutes or less. So when you said this one felt like forever, it was 4 times as long for the most part.
It's crazy.
Dave says this was actually the best match of the entire tournament, which speaks volumes for the tournament itself. Hey, at least when it was over, Mabel didn't win. The finish, particularly due to Michaels, did have a lot of heat, 1 star and 3/4.
So we ended up having, combined in the quarterfinals, a 1/4 star match.
We are in the positives. We're in the positives. We're actually at a combined, after that one, we are actually at a combined 1 and 1/4 star.
Oh,
because it was dud, -1, +0.5, +1 3/4.
Oh my. It's so disappointing because King of the Ring is such an awesome tournament. And when it's done right, like it had been for a lot of years, except for the Mabel thing, and then you come to this, and this is just a complete afterthought. I can't believe it.
And even with Mabel, while it is funny to go back and look, even Davis burying it 5 years later, at least the idea was have a big monster to face Diesel.
Right.
Because Diesel's a big guy. Like at least I do get that. The crazy thing is though, is that this literally it was the Kingmaker. Like you were going to be next. Like you said, it's an afterthought and it's a shame. And this is what made the tournament go away.
Yeah.
You know, these sort of events desensitized people or made them not as excited or not as invested. And even when you did have a big time winner like Brock, like I was at the King of the Ring that Brock won.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and it was cool, but like it didn't feel the way that it did when Brett got the scepter and the crown and got attacked, or
right.
Owen sat on the three, or the Austin 316 set. Like, the shine was off a little bit. The bloom was off the rose here. So, All right, next match, brother. What you got?
Next match is Hardy Boys versus Edge and Christian. The winners of this match become the #1 contenders for the tag team titles. And this match was actually a lot of fun. Edge and Jeff were in there early. Edge gave Jeff a nasty looking Alabama slam before Matt was tagged in. I absolutely love P.S. Hayes ringside in the going out shirts. I love it. Hayes does get involved in this match, but he eats a spear by Edge. The big spear of the match, though, comes from Edge off the middle rope in the corner to Jeff. Jeff was going for that jump off of Matt's back with the kick, but Edge speared him. It was awesome. The crowd got really up for that. The Hardys get the win after Gangrel missed it Edge on accident, but this was a fun match.
Dave said it was fast-paced, good match, way too short, and considering how the show ended early, it's hard to understand why. 2 1/4 is what he gave this one. The cool thing is this is the first pay-per-view match between these teams, right?
Yeah, and literally we're coming up on the first big one.
Because this is a feud that's going to go, man. This is really cool.
Yes. We've seen all this, and we're still not even an hour into the show. We're literally hitting like the 56-minute mark here. The Rock is interviewed by Michael Cole where he says he's going to kick Undertaker all over God's green earth. And then we follow that up with an Undertaker interview, and he says, what happens when you rip off the balls of a Brahma bull? Like, what are we doing?
What does happen?
I don't know.
Call him and ask him.
Hey, dead man, what happens? Vince comes out and says Shane cannot compete and that the match against Austin cannot take place. Commissioner Michaels then comes out and says that Vince isn't getting out of this one and that Vince will be facing Austin in the ladder match alone, and he's got to find a replacement tag team partner. The semifinals of the King of the Ring are next as Kane takes on Billy Gunn. Kane took control of this match early, but he was cut off by Billy with a drop kick that was really, really impressive. Kane was holding the ring steps up at his head, and you just see Billy Gunn just rise up and hit the steps like at Kane's head. It was really impressive. Once they got back into the ring, Billy goes for the Famouser, but Kane was ready. He gives Billy a power slam. Billy on the outside has a chair, but it's ripped out of his hands by an interrupting Big Show. Show swings the chair, but it hits Kane as Billy rolls up Kane for the win, and now Billy Gunn is in your King of the Ring finals.
Meltzer says no heat again. During the match, Ross was talking to Lawler about going to court over the name King, and I put this because this was a famous court case many years ago. At a time, Lawler hated the WWF, and he sued successfully to keep the WWF from ever referring to anyone. Harley Race was the guy in particular, since he had won the 86 King of the Ring tournament, as King in the state of Tennessee, since Lawler for years had been known to all wrestling fans under that gimmick.
Jeez.
So there you go. 1/2 star.
So our other semifinal match is Road Dogg versus X-Pac. Winner here faces Billy Gunn, and it's such a short match. X-Pac takes control early. Road Dogg does the dancing punch and the dancing knee. X-Pac does a sweet spinning back heel kick, but he missed the Bronco Buster, but it doesn't really matter because the same thing happened in the Hardcore Holly match. Didn't hit the Bronco Buster, but he hits the X Factor for the win.
Okay, Dave says, on paper, this match looked to be the best on the card. As it was, the interviews were longer than the match. 3/4 star.
So we're finally here at one of our main events of the evening. It is Undertaker versus The Rock for the WWF title. This match started really hot. Undertaker hit the ref before the match. The Rock hit a rock bottom immediately, went for the pin, but there's no ref to count, so a new ref ran in, and when he got to the count of 2, Paul Bearer, that rat bastard, pulled the ref out by his feet. The brawl then went into the crowd. They get back into the ring where Undertaker tried an old school, but he crotched himself. So that one I feel like I did not see a lot of, where Undertaker did not successfully get an old school off.
True.
The brawl went back out to the crowd again, but they do make their way back to ringside where Rock hit Taker with a steel chair, but the Undertaker held up the ring bell and they crashed them together. This gave an Undertaker the advantage as they got back into a rest hold. The Rock hit the people's elbow, but the ref was knocked out again, so Rock couldn't get another pin. We get an ether spot. Paul Bearer tried to ether the Rock, but the Rock grabbed the rag from Paul, used it on Undertaker, but Triple H interfered and gave Rock the pedigree. Somehow Undertaker got up after being ethered. He hit a tombstone on Rock to retain the WWF title.
Dave said that the ring bell chair spot was mistimed really bad. He said it looked awkward, and
like Undertaker had his back to him, and then he just like kind of went whoop, like just like threw it up really quick, like trying to, like, he didn't fully turn over and hold it up to like see it, and he didn't hit like the actual ring bell. He hit the bottom platform, like the piece of wood.
Yeah. It's just said it looked mistimed and it made the spot look bad. That's all I had for that. 1.5 stars.
Sean kicks Hunter out of the arena, and Vince says that he can't do that because that was his tag team partner for the main event. Vince makes a call for a replacement partner. We are at the King of the Ring finals. It is Billy Gunn versus X-Pac, and this, like we've mentioned, it's one of the worst tournaments we've ever seen. The matches are so short, and they're a complete afterthought, like we've mentioned numerous times here. Billy Gunn is your King of the Ring, and it's one that's not remembered because it's one of the worst of all time for good reason. The good thing about this match is the finish. Billy gave X-Pac a Famouser off the middle rope, and it looked really good, but it felt like they were just trying to get these matches out of the way just to get to the McMahon-Austin stuff.
Dave said there was no ceremony or anything much in this show to put it over, like Gunn had really done anything big. 1 1/4 star.
How many stars do we have listed here for all of the King of the Ring matches on this show? What is the combined star rating for all of them?
Running total through 9 matches, by my count, And I was sort of just doing this while you were going through some of yours, so I might have missed. But I have 8.25 right now combined.
If you put them all together, there ain't no way that they equal that. It's so bad. Man, this is so bad.
This nine combined matches, and again, I might be off by a little bit here. I'll double check before we're done. But 9 combined matches, as of my count right now, is 1 1/4 combined stars better than Omega Okada 4. All right, main event time, brother. What you got?
Yes, we're at the main event, and listen, if you are a frequent listener here on the Podski, I am exhausted with Stone Cold Steve Austin matches, but I got to tell you what, I literally wrote a whole page of notes on this match because I was so excited. So, full ownership of the company is at stake here, and this feels like kind of like a Money in the Bank type deal, long before that was ever a thing. But Vince comes out, he announces his tag team partner is Steve Blackman. We haven't talked about Blackman here on the show in a minute. But then the camera cuts to GTV and it airs Shane totally being fine backstage, and it was all a setup for Austin. Shane then panics when he realizes they were on camera, and I exploded. This was really, really good stuff.
This would be the first good GTV segment yet, because the first couple were unmentionable on the write-ups and reviews that we were doing on those Raws. So that's good to know.
Yes. So Shane tries to leave, but Michaels is waiting for him and makes him strut that ass to the ring. Steve Blackman was replaced immediately by Shane, so he had to leave. And he had to feel like a total job guy after that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the bad thing is that we were reading for all this time that Blackman's going to come back as a heel. Blackman's going to come back as a heel. And Blackman comes back as a heel, and I think that's it. I don't know how much of a run he gets after this. Shame, man. Proud of Central PA.
Austin comes to the ring, and the crowd is literally melting. And guess what? We start a match on the ramp again. Austin took control early. The McMahons finally got it together, though, after Vince grabbed a ladder. Shane and Austin fight to the top of the entranceway on the ladders, and this legit looked scary because these ladders were so janky, they could have fallen at any point. But if you do look closely, you can see that they're literally held together with zip ties. So that means that they're actually super secure. Austin yeeted Vince into a ladder, and I legit could not stop laughing at Vince's bump because Vince looked like just a wooden board just falling straight onto a ladder. It was really good.
Dave did applaud Vince's work here, because even though he is not a worker and, has been living the dream here over the last year or so, he did give him credit for that.
He should get some credit for what he did here. Austin slowly disassembles the entranceway by throwing to the McMahons into each one of the ladder supports. The last ladder is there, but there is a chain, which Austin yanked the chain, and the last support collapsed all of the ladders on top of the McMahons. Austin takes his ladder back to the ring to retrieve the briefcase since the McMahons are pinned under the ladders, but they escape and stop Austin. They jump off the ladder as Shane is laying on the announce table. Austin and Vince fight on top of the ladder, but Vince pushes the ladder over with Austin onto the announce table again. Vince climbs the ladder in the ring, grabbing the briefcase, but Austin is there to low blow him. Austin goes up the ladder and rams Vince's face into the rungs of the ladder, and then he suplexes him off the top. They brawl in the ring as Shane is on Vince's shoulders trying to reach the briefcase, and this was so great. Austin is waiting for them to turn around. Austin hands out stunners while they were on each other's shoulders. Austin grabs the ladder, and as he's climbing the ladder, the briefcase is being pulled up to the top out of his reach. So then Austin tried to figure out what was going on. While Austin is doing that, Vince is climbing the ladder. Stone Cold climbs to the top, but Shane pushes the ladder over, dumping both Vince and Austin. Shane grabs the briefcase for the win, and this was awesome. The McMahons retain control of the WWF here.
Whenever I rewatched I went from Mania 1, and I think I got to 2002. every single WWF pay-per-view. And this was a couple of years ago. Yeah. And when I saw this, I was gobsmacked. Like, I could not believe that Stone Cold did not win this match.
Yes.
Especially after, like, you can't have a lot of good, new, creative ladder match near falls, especially now, like seeing it with, I guess, what would have been in that time, like 2019 or 2020 eyes. Like, you feel like you've seen it all.
Mm-hmm.
Man, when they dumped all them ladders onto the McMahons and Austin goes up and he's climbing, and I'm like, okay, this is it. This is going to be interesting to see where it goes. And then yoink, yoink. I was like, what is happening here?
Yes.
I completely had no idea that was about to happen. And then do you know, because I did not go to see who the puller is here.
I don't think I know who the puller is either. I don't think it's ever revealed. I'm trying to figure it out, like, ringside. And so he's asking the people ringside, and everyone's like, not me, not me.
So and if I'm wrong, I apologize ahead of time because we'll address this later on this summer. I feel like it's the Big Boss Man. And the reason why is that Boss Man got beat down by the Ministry after Austin beat him on a Raw. We didn't cover that because it was just sort of a middle of the show match. And then there were some run-ins with, like, the Boss Man, because we have a schism now sort of in the corporate ministry, right? Mm-hmm. And so Shamrock got the boot. Boss Man appeared to get the boot. I feel like it's Boss Man, but I might be wrong. So Dave says that they had done the storyline throughout the show that Shane was injured and Vince would bring out a surprise partner. In the tradition of other big WWF pay-per-view surprises, such as Jimmy Snuka, Rockabilly, Dwayne Gill, Sable is her own mystery wrestler, out came Blackman, collective groans. Poor fella. After the show went off the air to send the live crowd happy, Triple H came to the ring and Austin stunned him about a dozen times. 2.5 stars.
I felt that this was such a awesome main event because the other main events that we've had here in 99, they've just felt like so laborious to get through. Like, they're just so long, and it's the same thing reskinned over and over again. And this felt fresh and it felt different, even though Austin did go up and they did fight at the entranceway and they did tear down the entrance, but they come back. All of it just felt new and different. And I don't know if that's because it's the injection of both of the McMahons this time that it just made it feel more different. But I really enjoyed this match, and it sucks because this main event does not equal the rest of the show. The rest of the show is hot dog water, but this is really, really good.
Yeah. And look, man, the entire show, I did do the count while you were running through your match review, is 10 cumulative stars. So 10 cumulative stars out of 10 matches. So this show literally averaged 1 star per match.
I can't believe that Dave only gave that main event a 2.5 star.
Well, what I would assume is Dave bias because he doesn't think Vince is a good worker. Shane annoys him. Yeah. And even though Austin's great, it's a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. And this is still 90s Dave is so pretentious because today you're getting 4-star matches with all sorts of smoke and mirrors that we see in all of the different companies. And because there was still actual wrestling happening in Japan and with cruiserweights in WCW and with your Juventud Guerreros and guys like that he's really into, that's why I think that it's such a hard. Yeah, I think this is certainly some Dave bias here.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. That concludes the King of the Ring 1999 show. I want to thank Teddy Mongoose for the Mongoose reads. He did a lot of reading today. We gave you so much stuff, and we literally cut out so much stuff that we have not even talked about yet here on the Podski. So we thank you, the listeners, as well for subscribing to the channel. You have unlocked the Eddie Guerrero bonus show. Do not expect that one as quickly as you got the Rick Rude episode, but it is coming soon, so don't worry about that. Next week, we have Great American Bash 2004, and then we're on the road for the rest of the summer here. Super excited for everything we got here. We thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on the Podski.